So from that point on, qi becomes, has a political resonance, right? It's always part of this kind of politically bound and harmonized universe. Um, and one of the things that I think Don Harper's work and Vivienne's work has really shown is that, in the next century, in the second century, the Eastern Han, the Western Han, all those texts are all talking about qi. Um, right? And different ways of cultivating qi through breath work. You get the Dalian tool, right? These diagrams of people doing qigong exercises.
All right, welcome back to Locus Classicus. I'm your host, Wilker Vallis. I'm joined here with my co-host, Michael Brown. And today we're very honored to have Michael Stanley-Baker from the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And Michael, what do you teach at what is your kind of position there, and what are you teaching at the university?
Yeah, so I'm based both in the School of Humanities and also part-time in the medical school. And in the School of Humanities, I'm in history, and I teach, history of Chinese medicine, history of Chinese food, kind of biopolitics in East Asia, science and tech in East Asia, history of science, this kind of history of ideas in East Asia, and that kind of encounter with kind of Western norms, or what people think of as norms, and actually changing practices over time. And then in medical school, I teach biomedical students in their first and second year medical humanities, which is kind of looking at how do I call it, the rehabilitation of subjectivity within the medical environment, of looking at how people construct meaning, how people relate to disease and doctors and power and race and gender dynamics that are ongoing and that are ignored in a data-driven kind of modus.
And for the university aspect, not the medical school, is that undergrad, or is that master's? Or
it's undergrad, although we have we have a master's and PhD program, and I drop into one of the kind of general introductory courses to the incoming grad students.
Yeah. Okay, great.
So Michael, actually, this is just something I thought I'd say. I mean, congratulations on being our first guest here. Hopefully, it won't be our last. Hopefully, we won't scare people off coming on the podcast, because we've got some people that we really want to talk to. But thank you for coming on and being our first guest on this podcast.
Oh, it's an honor. I'm really happy to be. I mean, I really liked the conversation that you guys have started up. I think it's an exciting way to take the discussion forward.
So, can you give us a little bit of a biography and history about your study? Because you've just told us what you're doing now, but how do you end up there? Because probably most people wouldn't imagine, someone going and teaching in Singapore at a university or something like that, and teaching history and medicine and philosophy in Singapore. That's not a very common career path, I think. So tell us how you have arrived to do that.
I took a wandering one, let's put it that way. After I did my undergrad, I did in English and philosophy, and I thought at the time it would be something like Wenxue.
And where was that? Where did you do that? Sorry.
In University of East Anglia in Norwich. And it was a really great program, but for them, Eastern philosophy was Paris. They never thought of anything,
wow.
India, China. We didn't get to read any of that stuff.
Can I just say that I took a history of philosophy course at my university, in University of Queensland, and they started with Descartes. So, I was a little bit disappointed.
Yeah, no Aristotle, no.
No.
So I was really interested in yoga and self-cultivation practices, and at that time, and I kept thinking, I want to do something that is related to the body, that looks at the ways in which the self is embodied. And so I ended up taking a TCM degree for 3 years. I studied in Rosito College in Boulder, Colorado. I had a choice between that college and Denver, because I sort of moved over there for personal circumstances brought me there. And then I ended up studying with Pao Qinghuang, who's teaching at Resido, because he had this long background. He'd been practicing since, he'd been learning in his parents' shops, and they were both pharmacists in Taiwan. So he was kind of a family trained, and he had the, had that kind of, Karate Kid kind of feel, He's like, oh, I'm going to go study with the master. I'm going to learn something authentic. I didn't realize at the time, that, Blue Poppy Press and Michael Wynn and everybody were also there in Boulder, Colorado. It was kind of a happening place full of all kinds of different forms of what people call alternative or, complementary medicine. And there's all huge sets of varieties there. So after I finished there, I went back to Taiwan because I'd lived there as a kid and wanted to study there. Ended up going to Taichung, but not studying at the TCM college because I couldn't read or write Chinese. I could speak it, but I couldn't read or write it, so that I can't keep up. So I studied with a practitioner that I met, and he was doing herbal mixtures and qigong, and he sort of said, well, you have to study with me and only me. And that's kind of what I ended up doing for a couple of years.
Can I just ask, Michael, did you grow up speaking Chinese, or how come you could only speak it but not read it, if you don't mind me asking?
Right. So I moved to Taiwan when I was 9, and I lived there for about 4 years, living in Taipei. And although I went to this kind of foreigners missionary school, my mom's half Chinese, and she had all of these kind of artists and intellectuals for these soirees at home. So I just listened a lot. So I could speak it and understand it, but it wasn't until I got back to Taiwan as an adult. I was, wow, 其实我是文盲，我什么都不会读。So yeah, I kind of, uneducated, illiterate in terms of Chinese background. Yeah, so I kept practicing with this Qigong master and learning herbs with him, and again was really interested in the kind of relation between the body, the self, and practices. And so I spent a year in India in an ashram that I was practicing at, which was doing a practice that I followed.
Was there any like use of medical herbs and things like that while you were in India, and did you notice, or was it more just that kind of like body work?
It was more body meditation, chanting. It was all kind of inner work, although people were all starting off to do Ayurveda and stuff. It isn't like what the cool kids now do, like the Siddha cultivation and the alchemical stuff like that. It was very, very vanilla for today, although at the time it felt adventurous. And I was really interested in this kind of how do we live across different bodies? How do people think and move across different bodies and different cultures? So I ended up applying to grad school, and I wanted to study non-Buddhist body practice transmissions between India and China. And so that's what I'm getting into grad school for. And at the time, I had no idea that I landed up with Stephen Bokenkamp, who's kind of the premier translator of Taoist texts and the only one who was teaching graduate students in America. And Rob Campany and John McRae, Jen Nanier were there. So it was kind of a little hotbed for medieval Chinese religions.
What school was that?
That was at Bloomington, Indiana University in Bloomington. So it was a really special time, and there's a few scholars who could sort of come out of that pack, who are now kind of making waves. And so I sort of steeped with them for 5 years, and then I realized I need to get some more medical training, and so I applied around and got a scholarship to UCL. So I studied with Vivienne, who's you probably know is an expert in kind of Ma Wengdui and excavated manuscripts. Yeah, and it was just awesome. She's the best advisor I could possibly have asked to work with. A lot of fun, really tremendous person.
So did you do your PhD under her?
Yes, I did. And the other thing that was exciting was I remember reading her PhD thesis before I got there and before I applied. And I could tell from her writing that she was a practitioner, that she did these practices. There wasn't this kind of, oh, that's a historical, other cultural thing. This is something that she understood. And once I got there, we had a lot to talk about it, this translation between contemporary knowledge and interpreting early texts, and that really fed into the way I think about studying
what,
Chinese medicine.
what was her PhD on, and what was your PhD on as well?
Hmm. So her PhD was on excavated texts looking at the formation, the Yangsheng tradition as it was prior to the Huangdi Neijing, and then demonstrating through sort of textual comparison the degree to which Yangsheng practice informed and shaped what became classical medicine. And yeah,
Right. That comes up in the Qi piece quite a bit. I noticed that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
she's a big influence for me.
And then what did you do? Sorry.
So I did a text that it's a third, fourth century text called the Zhenggao, and I was looking at the medical practices there, and it's a collection of writings and spirit transmissions and poems and letters of a family from Jurong, just outside of Jiankang, which is now Nanjing, and was the capital of the southern dynasties at the time. But later went on to become the most vaulted Taoist tradition. It was the founding of the Shangqing tradition. So it's a very difficult text to read because it's all kinds of different people writing. They're writing in code. They're writing in shorthand. And for some reason, I thought it would be good to do something very hard for my dissertation because then I'll cut my teeth on something, and then everything else will be easier. No.
Yeah, I read part of that. That part, is that up on Academia? At least part of that. Yeah. That was really interesting.
That's kind of you. I think it needs a lot of improvement. I'm currently converting it into a book.
To me, it sounds like kind of like the philosophy. If you like kind of try to play the hardest song on guitar, then everything else shouldn't be too hard. It just takes a very long time to to try and get good at that song. But then after that, everything shouldn't be too hard.
Exactly. It's kind of doing it the wrong way around. Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
So we'll put a segue in, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about a little bit of a hot topic lately. If people follow Scholars of Chinese Medicine on Facebook group, it's a really nice group where myself, Will, and Michael are all members and participate. And recently there was a discussion about, I guess you would say, how to define qi, or what is the definition of qi. And there was quite a bit of discussion, and I thought it was quite, how do you say, fortuitous, because what was it last year, I think, or was it earlier this year that you released the Routledge Book of Chinese Medicine? So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Oh, the handbook. Yeah, it's a labor of love, really. Vivienne got invited back in, I don't know, 2012, 2013 by Routledge to do this volume, and she said, it's too much busy work for me, Michael, why don't you do it? So I was like, okay, I'll work on this. But we had a great time putting together this sort of cast of characters, from all the great scholars that we could think of, working on all the best topics. And we plotted that in 2013, and everybody very graciously contributed and wanted to buy into this. It took us a long time to produce because of various things. So I was hunting for a job. Vivienne had a heart attack, stroke, hysterectomy, knee injury, and all kinds of things. I was moving country, so we had lots of interruptions. And then at one point, we got together with Dolly Young, who also graduated under Vivienne, and we said, Dolly, can you take on the kind of editorial management? We'll do the kind of historical editing. You manage the copy editing, and then we just got a sort of process got a process going, and that I love this volume because I think it touches on the broadest range of topics in Chinese medicine, any volume that I know of. And we go from, well, not from Yao Mao, but we go from Han to modern day. We discuss excavated texts, we discuss some conceptual fundamental issues. We've got a good introduction to Yin Yang Wu Xing. Chen Yunrong did a really nice chapter on that. Stephen Boynton has a great article on the kind of canonization, the ways in which Quantum aging became increasingly
I
central.
I did a reading of that for him maybe in like 2016 or 2017. So that's kind of when I first heard about the project, and I was like, oh, this sounds great. And because that was a really good article, and I think it's a great article for people who want to learn more about the Huangde Neijing, just kind of its origins. And I actually quite like some of his translation choices of the Suwen and the Ling Shu. I can't remember what he says for Ling Shu, but I think on the Suwen he says something like questions of the fundamentals or something like that.
Yeah,
which I think is
I'm sitting here nodding a lot, and I don't know if this is going to come through on the podcast. Yeah, I was really impressed by his translation choices too.
So sorry, I kind of brought that up, and we were talking about something before. But what was your contribution to the book, and that will tie into the discussion of scholars on Facebook.
Right. So I helped translate a couple of chapters, and then I wrote two of my own chapters, one on Taoism and medicine, and another on Qi, and of course the introduction. Yeah. So I guess the Qi paper, which you've been asking, which came out recently, was just a question that I had seen ignored in a huge amount of scholarship, and everyone has it's paid a lot of attention to in the kind of Zhuangzi philosophy. Arthur Graham, I think, wrote some of the best work on it, most engaging thought pieces, at least in English scholarship. Kunio is a big focus for him in his writings about different practices over time. In fact, he has a volume of translations on Qi, medicine, and Taoism from 2007. But there wasn't a consistent wrapping up of, how do we deal with this term question? And it's funny you mentioned my mom, who's an art historian. She once had she told me one time she met Joseph Needham, and she said, wow, Joseph, the one thing that you're missing in your series is Qi. It's fundamental to Chinese science and to so many of the Chinese practices.
Right.
Yeah.
And he said, well, if you can show me how Qi can be measured, then I will write a volume about it.
Because his book is called what? His books are called Science and Civilization, right? The series. So I can see why he would want perhaps something like that kind of quantified.
Right. Exactly. It's these measurables. And so I think, scientific writing has kind of avoided it. Dagmar Schaefer wrote a nice piece on it about a Ming-Qing naturalist and how he was sort of thinking about the formation of gases and in relation to geography, geographic areas. But it's not been addressed. And I think, there's been some great anthropological work that has danced around the topic, but not addressed it, not wanting to be divisive. So I thought, oh, well, let's look at it again. And I think the main thing I found is writing it and following through some of the other great works. There's this in the footnotes, there's some great sort of multi-chapter volumes and stuff that have been done on it. Is its multiplicity of discourses. And the more I took a kind of science and technology studies relationship to it, a bit different from the kind of positive approach of Needham's time. Not to blame Needham for it, but that's just was the currency of the time. I thought actually it really functions like power. Power can mean one thing to an electrician, to a politician, and to a boxer, right? It all sounds like the same word, but in fact, when you look at how they do what they do, it's fundamentally different idea, it's embodied in a very different way. So I thought this might make an interesting way to kind of look at how Qi synthesizes so many different fields of knowledge. And my own suspicion, though I didn't really state it boldly in the paper, is that it's kind of important to Chinese civilization itself as kind of a different.
Sorry, Michael, we've just lost you for a moment. Can you say that again, please? Sorry, we just lost you.
My essentialism is getting blocked by the internet. I think there's an element where it plays a big role in the synthesis of Chinese-ness that takes place in the Han Dynasty, where they're bringing together all these forms of knowledge and creating, this large cosmological view that should unify everyone and enable people speaking different tongues and living in different regions to have a common ways to interact. And I think Qi functions very powerfully at that. And no matter how rational modern day Chinese people are, they'll never escape the Qi being present in the language. Even the most rational scientists will talk about the spirit of something, even though they don't believe in spirits and ghosts. And qi is like that in Chinese. It's everywhere. It's in all kinds of different vocabulary.
Definitely. So let me ask a question. What, when I was reading this article, I was immediately struck just in the opening with what I thought was a really cool and discussion of the etymology of qi. That was something you really went pretty far back and did a great job in covering the whole trajectory of it. And so my first question is, how do you pronounce that word in that ancient Chinese? Do you know?
No, I don't.
How was it? If I recall, it was written something like, was it YZECK? Something very, very. I read it and I thought, I got no idea how this is to be pronounced.
Yeah, I'm not sure that even expert know either, because I think there's a certain point past which they're just kind of saying, well, these represent logical directions that these sounds would have come from, but how they're pronounced, I think it's kind of hard to say. So yeah, there's pronunciations in here that are spelled XJET and XJEI, and then there's schwas and other yeah.
That might be a question for Leo Locke. I think he might know the answer to that. If anyone would, he probably know.
Yeah,
he loves that stuff.
And they say tongue poetry is best read in Fujian, in Taiyu, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. It was sort of the language of the officials and like the ruling class during that time period, right?
Right. That's the Guanghua. That's the period.
My next thing that really struck me, sorry to take the reins here, but the next thing that really struck me with that etymology is, for a lot of people, and I think like most practitioners, like we're familiar with the modern spelling of, or the modern writing of qi, but what comes through in your tracing of that etymology, I thought, is that the very first instantiation, the very first representation of qi might have been somehow bodily, whereas later in time, qi is sort of seen as, well, maybe like this vapor or something like that, some sort of but it seems like what you're saying there is that it's breath sort of expelled angrily or something like that. So that was really interesting to me.
Yes, so this insight, I really have to give a much bigger acknowledgement to Donald Harper than ended up getting into that draft of the paper that came out. I think when we re-edited it, I want to put it much more strongly, because he really presented to me Alex Schussler's argument and kind of walked me through a few different things very delicately in one email, and that formed the basic foundation of this whole argument. So really, it's thanks to Don Harper. But he was
nice.
That Schussler noted that there's parallels in Austroasiatic and Sino-Tibetan of these kind of I'm not sure how these are pronounced, and that these may well be sound loans, and that qi may have been formed as it is because of a sound loan from this other graph, which is about giving grains to horses and feeding people and offering, which also has this qi kind of sound. So in the Austroasiatic, there's parallels about anger and breath and this kind of steam that comes out, which is kind of a very interesting and different take. I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody has any clearly defined, or we can, make a definitive argument. But we can say that there's more evidence, at least out there now, that points to more possibilities than were available to Xu Shen when he wrote that definition that we all believe in, that we kind of use today about, steam rising from grains.
So that was by Xu Shen in the Shuowen Jieze, right? The first kind of dictionary, or what you might say, what is it, like explain to characters or something like that.
Right.
And I guess, I had a question about that as well, that definition of it kind of in vapors. Do you think that, because that was the first definition in the dictionary, do you think that kind of like maybe had an influence on how other people were using it, or do you think they just had to write down a definition and they still kept these kind of previous ideas that you demonstrated, like from Mengzi or the other philosophical texts? How do you think they kind of worked with that dichotomy a little bit?
How did the editors of Xu Shen's work?
Well, I guess how do you think that the people at that time were viewing qi, where they kind of, so they had that dictionary definition, but you know what you put in your kind of work is that you show that that definition is true, but there's still so much more to it in how it's used in other texts. Even I think you mentioned it. Is it in the Zuochuan where it is like the yin yang, the wind, rain, or something like that, and the dark and the light? Like you kind of show that yes, that is part of truly, but there's still so much there about what qi is.
Yeah, so there's a changing movement of use of qi, right? So its description as this kind of bodily energy. Sorry, I'm getting into Star Wars here. I just watched an episode with my kids this weekend. The bodily, let's say fluid, if you want to say that fluid, something that passes through the body, is that is related to the body and well-being. I mean, you see that evidenced in the Guanzi already, and the Zhuangzi is already talking about that kind of use of qi, but it's still quite different, used differently from yin yang and wuxing, and where they become coalesced is in the Zuozhuan, right, which is this advice to Qin Shi Huang as he's forming a state about the natural world, and there you have these different qi, which are the signs of the political eras, and each new political era or each dynasty has this different color, right? And so he's advising that the previous era from Confucius' time and what Confucius saw was this red bird on the altar, and that was red, and that's fire, and now water controls fire, so Qin Shi Huang should take black as his kind of livery, as his coloring. So in that kind of argumentation about the succession of kings, as it were, the succession of dynastic powers, you see yin yang, wuxing, and qi for the first time in the Zuozhuan being used together. Sorry, not the Zuozhuan, the Lü Shi Chun Qiu.
Yeah,
it's the Lü Buwei who's advising
the spring and autumn annals of Lu or something.
No,
just for people could.
Oh yeah, that's the right one.
But just so, because we probably have a lot of people who don't know like the Chinese names for.
It's been translated. It has been translated, but I can't remember who by.
Well, I don't know if the whole thing's been translated, but definitely very good sections of it have been.
I think it has in 2 volumes. Okay. I can't remember who, but I definitely think the whole thing has been translated as well.
Yeah. So from that point on, qi becomes, has a political resonance, right? It's always part of this kind of politically bound and harmonized universe. And one of the things that I think Don Harper's work and Vivienne's work has really shown is that, in the next century, in the 2nd century, the Eastern Han, the Western Han, all those texts are all talking about qi, right? And different ways of cultivating qi through breath work. You get the Daoyin tool, right? These diagrams of people doing qigong exercises, or we could call them, we could retrospectively now call them qigong. Now they're called, at the time they were Daoyin.
Which is stretching and pulling, you might translate as, or do you have a better term for that?
That's basically, I go to Dolly Young, who's the expert on Daoyin, and I think she stretching and pulling or guiding and pulling.
Yeah. I just want to kind of unravel what we were just talking about there, because I think it's quite interesting, and I just want to try to define it a little bit more precisely. So this point that you're identifying in the Zuozhuan, that seems just like incredibly important, right? Yeah. Where we finally see this marriage of 5-element and yin yang and qi. And so how exactly is qi functioning in that specific context?
Can I just say it was the Lu She Chun Chu, not the
sorry, Lu She Chun Chu. Okay, sorry. And that would be a little bit later than the Zuozhuan, right? The Lu Shi Chun Chu is significantly later.
I think it's about 260, around that era, isn't it?
Zuozhuan is there?
No, that's the Lu Shi Chun Chu.
Oh yeah.
But I'm not sure about the Zuozhuan.
Right on the eve of the Qin dynasty. Yeah. Okay. So, anyways,
So, so they come together as a it has a cosmological takes part in cosmological unity, and that cosmological unity is politically bound. I think is the simplest way to describe that.
Exactly is qi do it because we understand what wuxing is there, what yin yang there, but what is qi in that context?
Well, that's probably the best thing to do is go back to the primary source itself, right? Um, and here it's the substance of the universe that is. Actually,
Okay.
as we're looking at it, I'm realizing I've got the Zuozhuan passage here in my chapter, where it becomes politically active for Qin Shi Huang is in the Chunqiu. But there, it's heaven has 6 vapors, which descend to make the 5 tastes, and they radiate out to make the 5 colors. So it's these 6 foundational essences which diversify into becoming the known and the knowable world, I would say.
Do you think that those 6 are kind of like a precursor to the 6 qi in the Neijing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. A precursor to that. Those numerologies are significant, and they carry on. Of course, they take on different ramifications in different times. I mean, I don't think they were, in the early periods, they weren't defining the, Taiyang, Taiyin, Jueyin, all of those such specificity, and certainly weren't drawing channels on the body at all. To the degree that we see in the Meiji.
So that's similar to like a Guanzi perspective on qi, where qi is this primordial stuff of the universe to a degree. That's quite interesting, and it's also it makes me wonder, because I think there's also a current that I see in the Guoyu, which comes a little bit earlier, right? Of qi as the dynamic force. Okay, so for instance, there's a really famous passage in the Guoyu talking about, and this is quoted by Li Jianming, and it's also quoted by some Beijing scholars, talking about this idea of agricultural planning, and when certain star constellations arise, that means that the qi of the soil is emerging in pulses, and so you have to stir and change the soil, or else the qi will become stagnant within the soil. So it's an interesting, in that particular context, it seems much more oriented towards this idea of this force, not just a primordial building block, but something that's driving change, essentially, and transformation. Yeah.
Right. And that's exactly that. And that, as it is aligned or participating in these movements of the seasons, it's definitely a driving force and an influence within and on all the things that are.
So in a sense, like when you bring it into that this idea of the seasons, and then that can also tie to wuxing in a way, and also to these 6 qi or whatever. There's a sense of qi in that sense being the driver of transformation, in a sense, as and embodied in this the ebb and flow of the seasons. Could you say that on a cosmological level?
I mean, I think it's always best to go back to the actual text and the passage itself, and then see what the passage says. I try not to over interpret, but rather kind of read closely into what each different passage says. So, I mean, if what you say, Jianmin has said about this passage from the Guoyu is true, then that sounds accurate. Yeah.
For me, I always like to look at qi, from Tao Te Ching, like chapter 42, the Tao engender 1, 1 engenders 2, 2 engenders 3, 3 engenders the 10,000 things, and then it's kind of, I think it's either like yin, is kind of embraced on the back of yang or something like that, and the kind of the chi moves between the two of them as well. And for me, like I've always thought of that as kind of like being a very kind of powerful kind of like idea of what chi is as well, has kind of it provides the opportunity for these two poles to have, a kind of almost like a, what would you say, like an infinite kind of way between them, or 10,000 things. So that's what kind of like allows the manifestations of everything as well. Because sometimes people will think of like Taoism is about a duality, but I really think it's about kind of three, and all the possibilities that can come from the mixing and merging of yin yang through chi.
Yes, I guess we're thinking about this is from the Wangbi edition, right? For that kind of view on it. I mean, because I don't, I when I think about it periodically, I think it's really good to think about the Tao Te Ching as an evolving text, and the Guanzi is very different from the Mawangdui and the texts, because there are multiple pieces that are there that were then compiled, into by some editors into a single thing, but it wasn't unitary. And one of the things I noticed, and it's kind of buried in the middle of this paper I wrote on health in early China, is that the Mawangdui edition is the one where you find all the baby imagery and all this stuff about the breath and all the Tai Chi and all these kind of meditation practices. It's very late. I mean, if you compare to the more politically oriented ones in the Guanzi. So I would also be curious about, the relationship between that passage and when it first comes up, and is it it's parallels to the Tai Yi Sheng Shui and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Definitely. It sounds a lot like Tai Yi Sheng Shui, actually.
Mm.
And like just what you're saying about yin and yang, and this whole idea in Tai Yi Sheng Shui of moving from chaos to form, and then this back and forth movement, and also being sort of mediated to a degree by Qi. So potentially, yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah.
So have we come up with a unanimous consensus about how we're going to define Qi, or have we just made everyone more confused?
Well, I mean, my own feeling is definitions are not the way to go. Yeah. I think it's much more interesting to go with localizations and situating how those terms play out in different practices, because a Republican and a Democrat, or a pacifist and a warrior can all use Qi, right? And so I think it's historically it's interesting to see how is it done? How is Qi in the world? By who?
I think that's a really good point, is that basically, I think you could say that Qi is defined by what it means to that person at that time, or what it could mean to that person at that time, and everyone at different times will have a different understanding of what it is, perhaps, as well. And there might kind of be similarities or ideas, but I think that's a really kind of like important takeaway as well, is that you've kind of got to look at, when is it being used, what is the context of that it's being used, and like you say, go back to the original source materials and look at that.
Yeah, because I remember discovering this to be, I don't know if this is particularly for mainland China, but it was one of my experiences. I was having some kind of political discussion with a few people in the street corner, during early days of language classes and stuff. And at some point we began to be clear that we all had quite different perspectives on the topic at hand. And at some point, somebody just repeated a slogan, and we all diantou and went, we can all come into agreement and harmony. And we think so much about analysis and segmentation and division and individuation in the sciences, and in kind of modernity, right? It's the power of modernity to divide everything up and organize it. But I think it's also equally useful to think about the organizing principles and how they work. And I think Qi has played a really powerful role in organizing certain sets of practices and forms of knowledge. Even if you can, take a physicist or a chemist or whatever, and they can all say Qi doesn't exist. And you say, well, that doesn't matter, because the coordination of these empirical observations and practices is still important and viable. And you don't have to, you don't have to have a scientific definition, prove qi scientifically in order to prove its efficacy in cohering and organizing knowledge in useful ways.
And but this is something that I found very interesting in reading your article. Is that was this, I think as like practitioners or people who are used to just thinking of qi in a very sort of practical sense, there's a great tendency for doctors and physicians to want to define and to delineate. Insofar as if they don't do that, they can't really use it in a sense, right? That there has to be a limit on something if you're going to be able to practically use it in whatever context. And so this seems to me to almost be such a great way of talking about this sort of chafe between the scholar and then the practitioner, especially now in this day and age and in the West, right, where you talk about this modernity, right, and how much of scholarship these days might be influenced by this sort of post-modernity and sort of like a Latourian take on science. And then, so you have that on the one hand, right, in this idea of, well, everything has to be taken in the context of a sort of historical setting and so on and so forth, versus, but then on the other hand, and this is what I think is quite interesting, and I wonder if you felt this at the same time, that's the West. But then if you go to China, it's still modernity. You're still operating within the confines of dialectical materialism and Marxist philosophy, right? And so I wonder also if you have any conversations with these Chinese, and how you navigate that this postmodern versus modern sort of chafe.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've always thought that none of my books or works would ever be translated into Chinese because they would throw it out. It's like, this is just a bunch of hogwash. I gave a talk on the last time I was in China was in 2019 at a conference Don Harper kindly invited me to in Beijing and Chicago one, with a lot of 考古学家 and
archaeologists or
medical archaeologists and Chinese historians. And so I began to talk about some of these kind of theoretical approaches to, at the time I was looking at zhu or atractolodes and how it's used within the
sorry, did you say wu?
Zhu. It looks like the simplified for shu.
Yeah.
Baizhu, Cangzhu.
Okay. Like kind of alcohol, something like that.
No. Atractolodes, Baizhu.
Oh, Baizhu. Okay, yeah. Sorry, got you.
So I was describing how Zhu was taken as a local kind of indigenous, because Cangzhu actually in Maozhu gets its name from this mountain where the sect was founded, and they put a great store on it, on the recipes in that sect. And so I began to describe, how using this recipe localized people to the chthonic deities, the local gods, to their position within their own cultivation, and also how they had better knowledge to other people, and kind of really situated them in a very specific relationship to their other knowledge, other knowers or practitioners in their time and space. And all anybody wanted to hear was, what were the recipes and what do they treat? Don't give us any of this situated sociological mumbo jumbo.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating. And so how do you navigate, is there any sort of criticism? Because I think there's also, as much as like there might be derision of modernity in the West, there's also a derision of like Foucauldian postmodernity in China.
Yeah, and I think that's also well deserved too. Taken too far, you can end up just, I don't want to say anything rude online, but talking a lot of hot air, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it comes down to what are your research interests and priorities, and then also plays out into how do those research results play out within the larger landscape. I mean, I know
Definitely. Yeah.
the interest in Taoist medicine, for example, is it has potential to be more traditional than TCM. It's less scientized. It's more local. It's more traditional. All of those things. And let's get back to these kind of pre-modern roots of the practice. And I want to be like, great, that's fantastic, and let's start. I'm all about studying that more. However, let's remember that Taoist medicine is a modern construct, and it organizes knowledge in ways that local practitioners didn't organize knowledge. And I'm really interested in how did people at the time think about what they were doing and getting that clear. But it's politically useful in China to say Taoists have scientific knowledge, right? That goes back to Joseph Needham, who was the only person to win this amazing prize that I think has only been given to 3 or 4 people in China. Validating Chinese sciences and knowledge, and that translates into funding and to political position in departments, right? So it has a outplay within the intellectual community and institution building of China today. And similarly, so does postmodernity, hyper-individualization, transgressive political positions in the West. So we have to remember these are all hovering in certain worlds that have their own, currencies.
And I would like to say that I think that you of any I mean, I've read a fair amount of scholarship, but I've really noticed that about you, that you are very well. I think Pierce has talked about this quite a bit. Are very attuned to this tension between postmodernity and modernity, and this sort of practical usage versus theoretical discourse. And I think this might be, Michael, you think this would be a good transition to talk about some of Michael's other works?
Well, I just wanted to have one more question for Michael.
Okay, yeah.
Just on talking about the Qi and the paper, because what I thought was interesting was you mentioned you had to cut some stuff out about that Donald Harper has said. So just tell me, is there any, like, if you had unlimited resources to write about Qi, obviously you can only write about it so much in a book. Was there other things that you thought were really interesting that you had to cut out that you might like an opportunity to just kind of mention or anything like that? Because I think it's a great article as well. But was there anything there that didn't quite make the cutting block that you still think is important that you would like to talk about?
Well, I think there's future work that can be done, and I haven't done it, although I did a bit of digging into it when I was, working on this article. Actually, with a lot of help from people in the scholars of Chinese medicine community. People were really gracious, and I want to thank everyone, any listeners who were in that conversation, for all the input that they gave, because that input is really important to me and really helped this article come to fruition. But there's this orthography, this way of writing Qi with the 4 fire dots underneath the sort of simplified graph of Wu, of emptiness. And so that has been used fairly consistently throughout different Taoist texts to mean different things over time, but in order to differentiate 2 different kinds of Qi, something more embodied and something more theoretical. Could be something more to do with Yuan Qi, or your primordial primary Qi, versus the secondary or what do you call this? The postnatal, the normal Qi.
Right.
The Zheng Qi, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. So all of those writers did not mean the same thing when they were making that differentiation, but it became a trope within Taoist writing to differentiate it. And there's a great article on it in Chinese, which deserves probably translation in its own right, but certainly another level of digging into. I am not going to go there because I have other things that I have to. My hope is actually that this is a springboard for people to go, this isn't enough, more needs to be done on this topic and that one.
We can post a link to that article, and maybe we can get someone on translating that a little bit when we put out the podcast.
Sure.
Cool.
Sounds like a good article for sure.
So I think we'll transition to another. What would you say? It's like a program, or what would you say? How would you describe this? I've just put down in my notes Herb program, but is it like a website, a module? Give it to us in your words, Michael, about what this is. What is your vision? And yeah, just tell us and the listeners about it, because it's pretty cool.
So I'll start with the biographical intro into that, which is um, Josh Pollock. If you're listening to this, you'll have a chuckle. So the day that I graduated from Lucido College, we were constantly in awe of our teacher's mastery of herbal lore, and we would ask him to explain his diagnosis sometimes, and he would give us things like the magic square, and say you need to understand the magic square, and then you'll know why I did this, and we could never make these things match up. And so on the day we graduated, we got a photo of the two of us in front of Paul's herb collection, and we're both pointing behind it and saying, we don't know half of what these are and how to use them. We're not ready to go off into the world. One of the reasons probably I didn't end up going into practice more fully, because I was just like, what? I felt very unequipped to definitely not feeling like I was a master of my craft.
Good translation.
when I graduated from acupuncture school. So this project comes from that deep anxiety that I see when I read the Bensao literature, and it says, okay, these herbs are good for all these things, right? And I don't know how to pick which one of those from the Bensao literature to combine them into something, for a given thing. So why pick this heat cooling one over that heat cooling one? The Bensao tradition won't tell me. And then read the recipe literature. I have to memorize all of those herbs. And I guess I was just a poor student of Chinese medicine. And the Bensao, the recipe literature organizes it in different ways. So I wanted some way to it's always been a bugbear for me.
Can I just interject? And by recipe literature, are you talking about like fengji, as in like Chinese herbal formula recipes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Just to clarify for listeners there. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that can be from the very theoretical, like Shanghan Lun, the cold damage school, or the heat Wenbing school, the heat, what is it, warm disease school, or
Wenbing pie, something like that.
Right. To the very run of the mill, just collection of recipes that cure diseases without any explanation, the non-theoretical literature.
Right.
So in a kind of divergent thing, when I was in the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, this wonderful digital scholar, Chen Shipei, joined the department, and she was helping work on the digital gazetteers, this sort of huge collection of imperial records that the state collected since the Song Dynasty on. There are some back to the time, but the Song becomes a thing. And then you have very good geographic tables of contents of what was being produced in different regions. So I was like, how can I find where Taoist medicine is in the Taoist canon without going through the secondary literature, but direct from the sources? So we worked out this tool, and she said, well, I know people in Taiwan who can do this. So we worked at Taiwan, and they developed a tool that enables anybody to make similar types of databases. But the power of it is, I then made a database on the Taoist, Buddhist, and medical texts up until the Sui dynasty, right up through the period of division, because I wanted to see where was the medicine.
So the Sui dynasty is what, around 6th century?
Starts in 589, depending on when you want to cut your cake.
So do you include Sun Tzu Miao's works, or are they not quite?
Yeah, I had to stop before, otherwise, because Tang would just be its own problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of big texts in that one.
Right. Yeah. That'd be cool though to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, now I do. So that's the second part of this thing. So we got all those texts, and you go to search engines now, and even Google, you can put in your one search term. We use Boolean and put 5 search terms, right? But and look for things that co-occur, that occur in the same piece of text. But what if I want to look for all of it? So I got a great list of herbs from Mikhail Ikivesi, who's also on Scholars of Chinese Medicine. And he sent me this 10,000 long list of herbs, and I collected some other ones, Buddhist herbs and other stuff. And so I was able to throw what you can do is throw this whole list at the collection, and then it spits out not only where they occur, but it gives you all the metadata for it. So the date of the text, where you know it, the author, the geography, however you've constructed the database. So I used Schipper's Taoist canon, and I made a catalog according to his categories for dividing up Yangsong, alchemy, liturgy, visualization text, or whatever, all the different categories he has. And then I could see, oh, look, here is where it's all in the Shangqing things. Lingbao have some drugs, Tianshi, the celestial masters have the least, and could really begin to see where the medicine was popping up. And I use drug terms because drug terms are, they're material objects. They're out there and they mean something definite. Of course, you have this problem that not all drug terms mean always mean a drug at the time. Like there's this one called guijian, or ghost arrow, which is also a ghost. It's a demon spell. There's all these other meanings it can have. But if you have a big collection of what you think are drug terms and they're appearing in a lot in a text, then it's much more likely that those are going to be texts, right? Sorry, about have to do with drugs. So we use that, and I could begin to see, we can get a pretty good estimate and visualize who had the most drug knowledge, who were thinking in the most medical ways. You can do this with acupuncture points. This is actually a project I want to do, and if anybody wants to work on it with me, I think it's interesting.
I think I know a translator of an acupuncture text. I'm not sure. You might be able to offer up a little bit of
decently qualified.
Yeah.
Look, he's a great translator, but he's a bit of an asshole. But
so I mean, as you know, right? So the Jiayi Zhenjing has like what, double the amount of acupuncture points that there are in the Huangdi Neijing.
Yeah.
And you see in the Zhenggao, I'm writing a chapter on this actually at the moment, on they're fighting over acupoint names and why we should use certain names and not other names, and where they're located and what gods manage them and stuff. I think it's an interesting question. What about all those star points? And are there other star points that are not don't have Xing in them, but they're known as gods?
Can you tell us what was the text that you said, the Zhenggao, and when was that written?
So the Zhenggao is a compilation of visionary messages from 360 to 370 thereabouts.
Oh wow, so very early.
Yeah, but they're compiled by Tao Hongjing.
Okay.
So it's definitely a Taoist medical text. I mean, he straddles that line.
And it's all discussing acupuncture and things like that.
Well, it has those peppered in there. Yeah,
okay.
These debates about it.
Wow, I haven't heard of that one. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
We'll definitely post that article up on the podcast, because that's a really cool article that more people should read. And people are so interested in Taoist medicine. This is the real thing,
Yeah, no, exactly. It's really fun stuff to explore, and you see them working it out, defining it and creating it and shaping it. And what I love about it is I think that speaks to practitioners today who are building their own practices and defining things, because just like in the past, they're defining it and working it out and saying, this is what works for me and for, how I'm connecting with the forces that are.
So if we can come back and talk a little bit about this program, is it kind of giving you a visualization of kind of trends in literature that you would say, that you kind of keep seeing, this keeps popping up, this keeps popping up. So they might say that this is working, or this herb is working, or this treatment, and you can kind of, and by looking at this, we're looking at this kind of either term or herb, something like that keeps popping up, you sort of think, this is something that we need to kind of analyze, because a lot of people are saying this is important.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing us back to that. So that I did this Dalwood Med 60 thing, and there's still a lot of work I need to do, write papers and stuff. It could produce a lot of material, but the momentum of scholarship moves on, and I'm developing. I've collected from the Zhongyi Kexue Yuan, the China Academy of Chinese Medical Sciences. Liu Changhua very kindly donated to me his database of texts. So we got the raw text.
Wow.
And they're also annotated, and they were up online for a long time, but that site is no longer getting any funding or support. So we've had to literally spend thousands of dollars unpacking and archiving and retransforming and cleaning it up, so that we could use it. But it has texts from what I call the late imperial, so from Tang through to the Mingguo period, actually, predominantly Mingqing texts. It's got a ton of stuff from the the Jinyuan Sidajiang, the great Jinyuan masters,
Yep.
and their, descendants, as it were,
Yep.
the people who are thinking through these problems after them.
So these are all texts, not just acupuncture texts anymore. These are all herbal formula, theoretical, commentaries. Yeah.
I just so I understand, there's one question that I think, from a practitioner's perspective, I think is like really could be cool. I want to understand if this is how you could use it. Like, for instance, sometimes people will always be wondering, like, hey, can I use chaihu and mahuang together? Or can I use chaihu and foods together? Is it so you could enter in those two herbs, and then see how they're being used?
Yeah, exactly. The great power of this is it's divided into recipes now. My earlier one was divided into chapters. So it's recipe level of analysis. When it's working fully, we'll be able to see, where they co-occurred. You could put together Sijun or Ba Jun Tang or these other kind of formulas. It's okay, where are they appearing? But then you can also see what are the extra stuff that's being added here and there. And where diseases have been tagged, you can begin to see, what are the disease patterns that they're, what do we say, the Binzalon you guys were talking about last time?
Identification.
Symptom patterns. Yeah. Anyway, how are they turning up? And we can then differentiate that according to the genre, the school, the date. We've also recording the geography of the author, so where they were born. So we can begin to see, are these regional kind of types of knowledge?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's an incredibly powerful tool.
Can I ask you, with this program as well, is that one of the other things, and probably people who aren't fluent in Chinese don't realize this, but there is debate about properties of herbs throughout the history of China. Some may say a herb is like neutral in temperature. Sometimes they might say it's warm. Particularly, you see this in Renshen, right? But there are other herbs you might debate about the type of flavor, like ma huang.
Right.
I think some people say it's pungent. Some people say it's bitter. So is there also that ability, if you enter in like the herbs with the formula, you can see how different bensals have talked, or like materia medicas have classified that herb or written about that herb as well?
Definitely, because we have a few bensao in there. I can't remember offhand how many, but we definitely have the Tang bensao and the Song bensao. What is it? Zhenglei bensao.
Yeah.
And the bensao gongmu, I think. I don't know, I have to check. So there's a whole set of bensao in there, so you can compare the different bensao editions on the individual plants too.
Because I think
one of the things we've done, so as well as the text, we've also developing a synonymy, so which is basically means a dictionary. But because I'm in Singapore, we needed something comparative, so we're including Malay medicines. We collected about 9,000 Malay drug names.
Oh,
and
wow!
Linking them to the authorized current botanical names that those plants are associated with. And if you read, so we stripped about 4 different Chinese dictionaries from this great site. You've probably seen it, Zhongyin Shijia.
The Chinese site.
And they kindly let us, download all their stuff. So we rather than it being a flat HTML page, we turned it into a database. So it's all linked. And we're also cleaning up all those botanical names. So you can also then take not just the current botanical name, but all of its earlier connected names and misspellings that have been used in literature in the past, which can be hundreds of them. And you can use that to search scientific literature. If you want to go and find, the chemical components or, the metabolic activity of those components and that kind of thing. And we're linking out to the geographic biodiversity of them, so where you can look at maps of where those grow today, and also the biodiversity history, so you can look at how those species have been talked about in the Western botanical discovery literature of the 18th, 19th century.
Interesting. So when do we expect all this to be online?
So we'll have a sketchy, lumpy prototype stitched together by December for fulfilling the first round of grant.
And usable for people in English?
Well, the menus will be in English. The texts are in Chinese, and the terms but we're going to tag all the drugs so that the drugs you will link out to the, they'll have the common English name and the various botanical names associated.
So there'll definitely be a level of usability for English speakers as well.
To a degree. I mean, at least to be comfortable to collect a bunch of recipes and then go copy and paste those herb terms and then find out what they are. You could expect that way.
I mean, for me, I think it's something like that would be, once again, if you're kind of thinking about whether or not to study Chinese, just getting yourself on a website like that where you might start seeing some Chinese, seeing some terms is always a good thing, I think, to get yourself exposed to a little bit of Chinese language as well. If you're doing Chinese medicine as well, no harm can come of that. And so maybe if this website could inspire people to kind of start learning some of the Chinese names of formulas, of Chinese names for herbs, I think that's a real positive as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I think just learning to see the difference between graphs, it would be enough, right? To be able to into something. Yeah.
So is there anything else that you want to talk about this project then, Michael? Or?
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I hope this will be helpful for historians who want to look at the migration of plants. Like, so, European or Arabic medicine historians who are like, I want to look for this species. When was it first discovered? One of the things we're recording is the chu chu, or the date of first mention in the tradition.
Yep.
So you can then begin to really see where does it intersect with that name into the tradition. And we're also doing something for...
Sorry, can I just interject? I think that could be really interesting for some herbs that have perhaps come from outside of China over, like the time period as well. So you can start seeing, when does this herb start getting used in the literature as well? Sometimes something like peppermint as well, like bohe.
Right. We're always wondering about that kind of stuff for sure.
Yeah. So I think that would be really, really cool, because sometimes, you can kind of see that point where Chinese medicine accepts this herb into their pharmacopoeia. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also, how can I say, it's about internal discovery as well as, definitely the imported materials. You're seeing a lot of that happening in the late Tang and the early Song. I'll do a plug for Chen Ming's article in the Routledge Handbook of Chinese Medicine. It's got a lot of stuff on Persian herbals. But you also see, one of the interesting things is people can be using substitute names, right? Because there's tons of alternate names within Chinese. So we've got all of those as well. So where you're getting an alternate name in a formula, maybe you're looking at, Four Gentlemen decoction, and one of the herbs, maybe Baishao, is called something else. Is it Baishao? What is it?
Baizu, yeah.
Baizu, right. Yeah. So maybe it's called by one of its variant names in one text, but then what is that variant name? This will hopefully tell you, this is a variant for Baizu on the one hand, but depending on the information, because we're also recording the geography of the authors of the texts in which the text is first mentioned, maybe it's a regional accent term. So it starts becoming written in this way in this region, and then you might investigate, did these herbs grow there? Is this a regional recipe?
Yeah, I mean, wow, that sounds really, really, really cool. And I think, if you've kind of like gone on some, like websites like that, it seems like kind of like one of those, you could go down like a Wikipedia hole with that, where you start off with like maybe Baiju, but then, you're kind of like looking at how it's paired with like, if it's in Junzitang, how it's paired with maybe like, what's in there, like Shengjiang or something like that. You could see how all these kind of combinations are used throughout time. And it seems like you could kind of go down a pretty deep hole looking at that sort of stuff.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Because
applications.
I hope that it helps people answer questions, but more importantly, I hope it helps people ask better questions that we couldn't ask before.
I mean, the other thing, it might not just help people ask questions, but it also might provide some answers to questions that have been previously asked, due to the fact that it is now, you can get all this data into a database and get visualizations and answers out of it. So it's not necessarily that it could ask new questions. There could be answers to old questions as well. And looking at that, if you see this, like you were saying with that, with Tongue, you might say, oh, like, if there was this variant of it, well, actually, that's just that same herb, but that is in that regional dialect name as well. So that could, I think, provide answers to, questions in the past. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, one thing that I saw new that I haven't seen written about in the literature, and if anybody who's listening, and you have a reference to send me, I would love to hear about it. But looking at the early geography of the Benzhao tradition, so a while back I mapped out all the three different layers of the Benzhao, from the Han edition to Tao Hongjing's edition, and it's out on a public database. And one of the things I discovered is I was just kind of exploring around the map in a way that no one in history has done before, because people haven't mapped this out. Is that I could see
something on that.
There's a huge concentration of drugs on along the Yellow River, basically. That's following this basic early migration, early movement of Chinese civilization, eastwards from Luoyang.
Shantian Qing'er, do you know?
Oh yeah.
You know Shantian Qing'er? Japanese scholar. Yeah, he has a good piece about. He has a theory of the geography of early Benzhao. That yeah, I can certainly help you send that to you.
Yes, thank you so much. That's awesome. Yeah, so one of the things I saw was that the major concentration of herbs that is recorded in the Mini Bielu, this sort of middle edition that Tao Hongjing put together, is in Taishan. It's like there's 50 or more drugs are all coming
exactly.
in.
Yeah,
They're
exactly. That's one of the the angles of the triangle that he draws. It's sort of like in the Shandong area, Shandong and Henan area, I think. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And and the other one is way out west past Xi'an. It's in Hanzhong. So there's another huge concentration way down there in the southwest. Yeah. Oh, this is great. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to it.
I would just say we're probably close to wrapping up. It's been lovely having you, Michael. But what you've done this kind of Routledge Book of Chinese Medicine. You're working on this herb program. What is next for you? Is there anything that we should kind of be aware that's coming out in the next couple of months, the next couple of years? Can you tell us more about what your plans are?
Next spring, the edited volume will be coming out called Situating Religion and Medicine Across Asia from Manchester University Press. And it's a collection of great authors, including Nathan Sivens, a piece from Nathan Sivens, which I'm really happy to include. And I'm kind of dedicating the volume to him, actually, because he was such a big influence on me in this question.
Well, I think he's been a big influence on Chinese medicine as a whole, really a powerhouse for Chinese medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at kind of religion and medicine as categories that we have approached in Western language scholarship with the modern lens, and how were these institutions, if they were institutions, or enterprises, maybe as a way of thinking about it, how were they formulated and how are they differentiated at different points in time across Asia, and how can we thinking about that question, begin to think about history of sciences in Asia, absent the European comparant, which history of science is always comparing against the great European, monopole. But in fact, people have been doing their own thing in their own places and times. And if you get Europe out of the picture, then what is the picture? How do we relook at that? And what are the comparable terms, devices, forms of relation that we can see? So this book is a kind of a sally forth into that direction.
Did you contribute an article to it, or are you editing, or can you tell us your role, please?
Yeah, so I'm not contributing an article because I'm writing a book about that in China.
Yeah. So don't get the article, get the book, is what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly. But I did write the introduction, which is looking at kind of the state of the field right now and arguing that the last 20 years have seen us put together medicine and religion in this new ways of relation where we're not bound up by this kind of science versus irrationality binary. And we're really looking at indigenous forms of knowing in new ways. And that's produced all different kinds of scholarship and from many, many different vantage points, right? Because now, scholars of Chinese medicine, Forum is actually a classic example of that, right? So people talking about Taoist cultivation and herbal treatment and acupuncture in the same breath, and then you have philological studies of excavated manuscripts of yoga in the same room with practitioners who are demonstrating how to do those poses, and that's being funded by the European Research Council. You've got Ayush in India promoting yoga, Ayurveda, Siddha medicine, and homeopathy as a state practice, right? Stateside, and you have practitioners who's either promoting them from the West, like maybe the sort of more Orientalist perspective, and you also have local practitioners in villages in indigenous regions who are seeing their access to the world transformed through this shift of discourse, which I'm calling religion and medicine in Asia. These three kind of poles, as it were, or corners of a triangle of conversation that's happening at multiple levels in the world today. And so that's my introduction, sets the scene, and then we use every chapter uses the same same argument structure, so it's easy to follow and compare what each person's doing, but across different times and spaces in Asia.
Wow. And so when can we expect that to be released?
That should be out in the springtime, spring or summer 2023.
2023, sorry?
Yeah.
Okay, so about a year, or are you in the northern hemasphere? So it's
sorry, yeah. So March to June.
Okay. So not too long. So that's 6 to 9 months. Oh wow, so not too long.
Yeah.
Be busy.
Yeah, it's tenure track. It keeps you busy.
Yeah.
If I could have one more question, Michael, where would you like to see? Because there aren't that many scholars, I think, that practitioners, I guess, like all the scholars who have been practitioners, who have done the study of the practice of the medicine, So where would you like to see this kind of like scholar and practitioner interaction, or what would you like to see in the future between those two kinds of fields? Is there an area that you think would be really interesting where like scholars and practitioners could interact or something like that?
Wow. Well, it's Facebook, scholars of Chinese medicine. I mean,
Yep.
I do think actually that's one of the cutting edge areas of the conversation. I've seen the discourse grow in the last five years even. It's just people's game. They're really bringing their game to those conversations. I wouldn't dare to tell people what to do. I think everybody's doing amazing work. My own interest, at least for the history of science, of China, is to get people away from we've got rid of rationality and as a boundary marker. Judith Farquhar, the anthropologist, said Chinese don't use rationality or epistemology as a way of breaking up knowledge. And Don Harper, Nathan Sivan, also in their own work, also said the same thing. So whither should scholarship go? And I think for historians of science in China, we need to look at the language of practice, how practitioners talk about what they do, and this is how they shape knowledge and create categories and hierarchies, like what's happening, like the practitioner discourse that's happening today. I think the language of practice is really where it's at.
One of the things that I find really interesting when I look at old texts is always how did they lay out the text? How, like, whether it's like a Bensao text or a disease text, how are they categorizing the herbs? Are they doing it by temperature, or are they doing it by kind of the substance that it is? Or do they have another way are they doing it by disease? But then you maybe look at the disease text, how are they categorizing it? Are they perhaps doing it by organ, or are they doing it by, the phase or element? So maybe it's a little bit different to you, but that's something that I find kind of really quite fascinating is what is the author telling us in the way that they lay out the text as well? What do they want to emphasize?
I have to say, I look at that all the time because we're organizing when you make digital editions of these texts like we're doing, you have to pay a lot of attention to those because those are your metadata. So in fact, we're right in the middle of figuring out how to insert all of those hierarchies and structures to enable people to navigate these massive corpuses. So that will be much more easily comparable, I think, through the digital editions, because you can just look at the metadata itself. That is a worthy object of study on its own. I quite agree with you.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up then today. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and joining us today, Michael. It's been an amazing discussion. I've really enjoyed it and I've learned so much. And, I already had a bit of an idea of what you've been doing, but, just to see how much you've done and then what's going on in the future, I think is incredible.
Oh, you're too kind. I just feel like it's important for all of us to do the best we can for the field, right? And do what's useful for people. So if it's useful, then I'm more than happy and really quite humbled actually to be invited to the conversation. So thank you. It's been an honor.
Cheers to more collaboration in the future and more dialogue.
Here, here.
Yeah.
And yeah, once again, look at not just Michael's article in the Routledge Book of Chinese Medicine. Just there was a lot of really good, the introduction to the yin yang, as you said, the Stephen Boyenton's piece on the Neijing. I think there was some like later stuff on acupuncture in there. Even an article I think that was translated by Huang Longshang, who's a very very important scholar of acupuncture as well. So that and it's free to access. Like how crazy is that it is that they made it free to access a book like that, because books like that, at least when I was studying, I'd think, oh man, I would love to buy this book, and I go look at the price, and it's $300 and a kidney.
Right.
So to have it free access and you don't have to be at a university, I would just say, thank you from the practitioner community for making that free to access for everyone, Michael. We really appreciate that.
I've so been there myself, I mean, trying to afford Bensky and Gamble is when I was in academic and everything, and it's such a valuable and important book. So it was I feel you, and it was the least we could do, because I think there are hierarchies in the world, and we get access to funds and stuff, through grants and things that we can apply for, luckily from our position as historians of science. So let's use that to make it accessible, because you don't make that much money off a book anyway, right? So
right.
well, what's the use of having such amazing information behind a paywall and people can't access it? Then you've done all this hard work, and people will be quoting older materials, perhaps things that are papers that are outdated as well. Now people can kind of go to the latest writings, the latest scholarly information on these topics, and that is just invaluable.
We will be having because there are many other authors and topics that we did not mention, and that's no result of any their lack of worth. It's a result of my absent-mindedness and lacking memory. But Vivienne and I will be hosting a workshop on this in late October probably. And we wanted to host it as a dual event, because when you go to conferences, you listen to the information, but you want to hang out. So we're going to have a hangout session where people can just go to a digital bar, and just chat. Get out of the boring panels and go talk to people.
Do you have to BYO, or is there somehow during some time?
The platform we're toying with, you can hop into the bar and it will fill you a digital glass of wine.
All right, Will, any final words?
I'm good. Yeah, like you say, like just we'll link to all the stuff. I'll have to go back through, because we talked about so much incredible content here, and we'll do our best to throw that below. on our various pages, and yeah, have a look. You know, it's all free and it's all very edifying and enlightening stuff.
Well, it's a pleasure to be part of the conversation.
Thank you again, Michael.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Bye.